You guys know I'm always on the lookout for PC parts, and a while ago, I was walking around a thrift store when I came across this $5 motherboard and CPU combo. It was in an old case that was in rough shape, and I had no idea if it worked. But you know that for only $5, I picked up faster than a bot dies to a Sabrina Carpenter skin in Fortnite. What I got here is a Gigabyte Z68X LGA 1155 socket motherboard that supports 2nd and 3rd gen Intel Core i processors. Some notable features include a better selection of video ports than your GPU, having 4 different options on the motherboard alone, including VGA, DVI, HDMI, and DisplayPort. Bet you haven't seen a graphics card like that in a while. Surprisingly, the motherboard supports USB 3.0, so you can transfer all your files at lightning speeds. It also supports CPU overclocking, so I might just have to mess around with that and test it out. So for the CPU that came with this, I was pleasantly surprised to find a legendary Sandy Bridge i7 2600K processor. The CPU was released over 14 years ago, and honestly held its own for years. It comes with 4 cores and 8 threads, a base frequency of 3.4 GHz, and a boost frequency of 3.8 GHz. I've never actually used one personally, but I've heard stories and read on subreddits that this thing can overclock really well. If you're lucky and you hit the silicon lottery, some people were able to hit 5 GHz with this. Again, that's on a 14-year-old CPU. My 5800X3D still isn't even hitting that clock speed. Today I want to test out this $5 combo and see if it's even alive still, and how it holds up in modern games. To test out the CPU and motherboard, I've installed 16GB of DDR-free RAM, and then the boot drive I'll be using is this Crucial MX500 SATA SSD. Powering the system, I have a 750 watt EVGA PSU, and then for the GPU, this is totally overkill, and it's 100% going to bottleneck the system, but I'll be using an RTX 3080 Ti, and then I'll be putting all of that on my trusty Air Jordan test bench. Booting up the system the first few times, I had no issues, but after taking the RAM out of the system to film, and then reinstalling it back into the system, it wouldn't boot. So I messed around with it a little bit, and it finally booted after swapping around the RAM sticks into different slots. I'm not really sure what was going on there, because they're all the same speeds. I think technically they are 2 different RAM kits, but the speeds are the same, and I didn't really see any other issues outside of that once the system did boot, and after that it did also continue to boot consistently. After getting everything set up for testing, I jumped into some games. Testing out Overwatch 2 first, at 1440p and 1080p, the performance was pretty similar due to the CPU being bottlenecked. At both resolutions, I tested on low settings and saw an average frame rate that sat in the 150s and 160s. This game is pretty well optimized, so it ran relatively smoothly in my opinion. That's coming from someone that typically plays this game at around 240 FPS. Next up, testing Marvel Rivals. It took forever to compile the shaders. Long enough that I almost just moved on to a different game. Because of this, I was expecting to run into some issues while actually playing the game, but honestly, it ran pretty decently. At 1080p low settings, I saw an average of 120 FPS with 1% lows in the 50s. Turning the settings up to 1440p high, the frame rate dropped to the 90s, and I saw the 1% lows dip into the 40s. Again, surprisingly playable. Next up, I wanted to test out Hunt Showdown, but I couldn't get it to start. It seems like there's an issue with the anti-cheat software not liking the hardware I was on, and I didn't really feel like troubleshooting it, so I moved on to testing Cyberpunk. I tested Cyberpunk at both 1080p and 1440p medium settings with no upscaling, no frame generation, and no ray tracing. I saw an average of 74 FPS and 1% lows at 41 FPS in the built-in benchmark. I was honestly pretty surprised by this as well. I was able to hit above a 60 FPS average. I also turned on the medium ray tracing preset at 1440p, and the average FPS was cut to the 40s, and the 1% lows down to the 30s. Next I tested Helldivers. Similar to the other games, both at 1440p and 1080p I saw similar performance. This did depend a little bit on what was going on in the games, but I saw the FPS sit in the 60s and 70s, and a 1% low around 39 to 40 FPS. Last but not least, I tested Fortnite. The first few games were choppy as usual, but after that it smoothed out a bit. At 1440p low settings, the average ranged from the mid-90s to the 110s. The 1% lows would start out around 20 and then gradually increase over time as the map got smaller. Testing performance mode, I did see about a 30 FPS bump by the end of the game, but this really didn't feel much smoother to me because the 1% lows were essentially the same. Honestly, of all the games, Fortnite was the one that felt the choppiest to me, and that's probably due to the lowest 1% lows. But overall, it was still playable. I'd still be able to have a good time with buddies if I was playing this game. If you're really trying to compete, you'd probably want something better, but if you're just chilling, it was usable. Overall, I'm pleasantly surprised by the performance. I was expecting the games to run a lot worse, and now I'm questioning how modern of a PC I actually need. Granted, the 3080 Ti definitely helped the CPU stretch its legs. Pairing the CPU and motherboard combo with a GPU a bit more balanced probably would have been a bit less notable. I don't think anybody's probably going to be using a 3080 Ti and a i7 2600K together, but it is interesting that this 14-year-old CPU isn't that terrible. It always surprises me how well some of these older processors can handle modern workloads. Well, that was pretty fun. Now I just need to figure out what to do with this motherboard and CPU combo. If you have any ideas, let me know down in the comments below. Maybe I'll try to put it in a budget build and sell it. Maybe I should use it for a month. Or maybe I could try overclocking it. Let me know what you think. Anyways, thanks for tuning in and have a wonderful day.